Welcome, Nocturnal Minds, back to our class. Oh, you are really study hard. Right, let's get straight into it. We're looking at the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky. The title itself sets the stage, exploring the biological underpinnings of our most extreme behaviors, both the terrible and the wonderful. So Sapolsky kicks off with a pretty intense thought experiment, a fantasy scenario. Imagine you've busted into Hitler's bunker, neutralized his guards, got him pinned down. You're ready to make the arrest announcement. But then the fantasy takes a dark turn. It's not about justice anymore, it's about raw, visceral retribution. The desire for punishment becomes almost physical, clenching fists, flushing cheeks. This isn't just a one-off weird dream. Sapolsky notes he's had versions since childhood. Now here's the kicker. This intense, almost sadistic fantasy clashes violently with his conscious beliefs. He doesn't believe in souls or inherent evil, thinks the word wicked belongs in musicals, doubts punishment should be central to criminal justice. Yet paradoxically, he feels some people deserve death, opposes the death penalty, enjoys violent movies despite supporting gun control, and remembers lyrics like Down by the Riverside while also knowing when to clap your hands. It's a mess, a confused, contradictory array of feelings about violence, aggression, competition, and honestly, just like most humans. This internal conflict isn't just personal, it reflects a fundamental aspect of our species. We have a serious problem with violence. Think about the scale: nuclear weapons, bioterrorism, mass rape as strategy, bombs in markets, school shootings, unsafe neighborhoods. The list goes on. Even subtler forms haunt us: childhood abuse, systemic oppression where symbols scream dominance. Violence is always lurking. If that were the whole story, tackling it would be straightforward, like eradicating AIDS or Alzheimer's. But violence isn't on that simple bad list. Sometimes we don't hate it at all. We pay good money to watch it in stadiums. We teach kids to fight back. We feel proud after a dirty hip check in basketball. Our language is full of military metaphors: rallying troops, ideas getting shot down. Sports teams are named Warriors, Vikings, Bears. Even chess commentary talks about murderous attacks. We build theologies around it, elect leaders skilled in it, and often, women preferentially mate with champions. When it's the right kind of aggression, we love it. This ambiguity, pulling a trigger can be hideous aggression or self-sacrificing love, makes violence profoundly hard to understand biologically. So, what does this book aim to do? It explores the biology of violence, aggression, competition, but also the flip side: cooperation, affiliation, reconciliation, empathy, altruism. It's about how we harm each other, but also how we connect and heal. Interestingly, Sapolsky shares some personal roots for writing this. First, having had little direct exposure to violence, the phenomenon genuinely scares him. He admits to thinking like an academic egghead, hoping enough study will make scary things go away. Second, he's naturally pessimistic, prone to finding flaws or sadness even in positive things. Becoming a parent shifted this. He actively sought evidence that things weren't always terrible, starting small with reassurances to his kids. As he learned more about the biology of violence, a surprising realization emerged. The realms of humans harming each other aren't universal or inevitable. There are scientific insights into avoiding them. His pessimistic self struggles to accept this, but there's room for optimism. How is this book going to approach such a complex topic? Well, Sapolsky makes his living as a neurobiologist and a primatologist. So this is firmly rooted in science, specifically biology. Three key points emerge from this background. First, he argues directly at social scientists who might dismiss biology as irrelevant or ideologically suspect when thinking about human social behavior. You absolutely cannot begin to understand things like aggression, cooperation, or empathy without considering biology. Second, and just as importantly, he warns against relying solely on biology. This is aimed at those molecular fundamentalists who think the social sciences are destined to be consumed by real science. Third, and this is crucial, by the end of the book, you'll see that it simply doesn't make sense to distinguish aspects of behavior as purely biological versus psychological or cultural. They are utterly intertwined, no clean separation exists. Understanding the biology of these human behaviors is obviously important, but Sapolsky bluntly states it's hellishly complicated. Why? Because unlike studying, say, how migrating birds navigate or the specific mating reflex in female hamsters, we're dealing with human social behavior, often abnormal behavior. It's a mess involving brain chemistry, hormones acting over different timescales, sensory cues, the prenatal environment, early life experiences, genes, both biological and cultural evolution, and ecological pressures. It's a tangled web of factors. So, how do we even begin to make sense of all these factors? We tend to use a cognitive shortcut. We break down multifaceted phenomena into categories, into explanatory buckets. Think about the classic chicken crossing the road question. A psychoneuroendocrinologist might say, estrogen levels triggered a response. A bioengineer might focus on leg bone mechanics enabling movement. An evolutionary biologist might talk about genes, favoring fur chickens responding to signals. Each offers a valid perspective within their discipline. But Sapolsky argues this categorical thinking can wreak havoc on our ability to grasp the whole picture. The boundaries between these categories are often arbitrary. Once we draw an arbitrary line, we forget it's arbitrary and get impressed by its importance. He uses the example of color perception. Different languages carve up the visual spectrum differently. Show someone two similar colors, and if their language has a boundary between them, they'll perceive them as more different. Paying attention to boundaries distracts from seeing the complete picture. The goal here is to avoid these categorical traps when thinking about complex human behavior. Okay, so what's the replacement for these buckets? Sapolsky proposes a layered approach. A behavior occurs why. Start proximally. What went on in the brain a second before? That's neurobiology. Pull back slightly. What sights, sounds, smells in the previous seconds or minutes triggered that neural response? That's sensory input and maybe short-term hormone effects. Expand again. What hormonal changes hours or days prior made the individual more susceptible to those stimuli? Then zoom out further. What features of the environment over weeks or years shaped the brain's structure and function, influencing its response to hormones and stimuli? Go further back. Childhood experiences, the fetal environment, genetic makeup. And finally, expand beyond the individual. How has culture shaped group behavior? What ecological factors influenced that culture? Keep expanding until you encompass events millions of years ago and evolutionary history. This seems better than single-discipline explanations, but something subtler is happening. Here's the most important idea in the book. When you explain a behavior using one of these disciplinary lenses, you are implicitly invoking all the others. Any given type of explanation is the end product of all preceding influences. It has to work this way. If you say, the behavior occurred because of neurochemical Y, you're also saying, because hormone X secretion this morning increased Y levels, because the person's upbringing made their brain more likely to release Y in response to certain stimuli, because of the gene coding for Y, and because millennia of evolution shaped that gene. There are no separate disciplinary buckets. Instead, each perspective, neurobiological, genetic, developmental, cultural, is shorthand, an expository convenience for temporarily approaching the whole multifactorial arc from a particular viewpoint. Each explanation is the culmination of everything that came before it and will influence everything that follows. Now, Sapolsky acknowledges this might sound pretentious. Wow, you have to think complexly about complex things. He sets up a potential straw man. Ooh, we're going to think subtly. We won't get suckered into simplistic answers, unlike those simplistic neurochemists or evolutionary biologists or psychoanalysts living in their limited buckets. He argues scientists aren't like that. They know they need multiple angles. But then he hits us with examples of influential scientists who were pathologically stuck in single buckets. John Watson, founder of behaviorism, famously claimed he could train any healthy infant into any profession regardless of ancestry, ignoring innate differences. Agus Moniz, Nobel laureate, believed mental disorders resulted from synaptic derangements and could be fixed by altering synapses, leading to the destructive practice of lobotomies. And Konrad Lorenz, co-founder of ethology, used misinterpretations of evolutionary concepts to justify Nazi racial policies and helped screen Poles for extermination. These weren't obscure figures. They were major players shaping education, views on mental illness, and social policy. Thinking that human behavior can be entirely explained from only one perspective can have devastating real-world consequences. All right, moving on. The second major challenge is figuring out when we're just like other animals and when we're utterly different. Sometimes we are just like other animals. When scared, we secrete the same stress hormones as a harassed fish. Pleasure involves the same brain chemicals as a capybara. Neurons work similarly across species. Female rats synchronize reproductive cycles. Studies suggest something similar happens in human females, the Wellesley effect. And yes, when it comes to violence, we can be just like other apes, pummeling, throwing rocks, killing with bare hands. But often, the challenge is appreciating how, though our physiology resembles other species, we use it in novel ways. We activate vigilant circuits watching scary movies. We trigger stress responses thinking about mortality. We secrete nurturing hormones bonding with adorable panda cubs. And aggression? We use the same muscles as a chimp attacking a rival, but we use them to harm someone because of ideology. Finally, sometimes the only way to understand our humanness is to consider solely humans, because the things we do are unique. Talking about sex afterward, only us. Constructing cultures based on beliefs passed down generations, mostly us. Causing harm through passive actions like pulling a trigger or nodding consent, deeply human. Passive aggression, damn with faint praise, cutting with scorn, very human. Sapolsky gives two striking examples of this unique human weirdness. First, his wife's response to a jerk driver. After honking and being flipped off, she decides to follow him, make him nervous. At a long red light, she grabs a grape lollipop, pounds on his window venomously, saying, "If you could do something that mean to another person, you probably need this," and flings the lollipop in. She returns triumphant. The guy drives away slowly, seemingly ashamed. What did she throw? A grape lollipop. Savage passive aggression correcting his mean behavior with a sugary projectile. Second, vs. Naipaul's account from Indonesia during the Suharto era. During mass killings, paramilitary groups would bring along traditional gamelan orchestras. Why? The veterans explained, well, to make it more beautiful. Bamboo flutes amidst burning villages. These bizarre examples highlight the virtuosity with which humans harm or care for one another, and how deeply intertwined the biology of both can be. Before diving deeper, Sapolsky admits we need to define terms, but warns it's an unwelcome prospect. Words like aggression, violence, compassion, empathy, sympathy, competition, cooperation, altruism, envy, schadenfreude, spite, forgiveness, reconciliation, revenge, reciprocity, love, they're central. Why the difficulty? Firstly, many are battlegrounds for ideological appropriation. Words pack power and carry values. Think about competition. Exhilarating discovery race against Cambridge, fine pickup soccer, silly Thanksgiving drawing contest, avoidable whose God is better. Secondly, and perhaps more significantly, these terms mean different things to scientists in different disciplines. Is aggression about thought, emotion, or muscle movement? Is altruism mathematically modelable behavior across species or moral development in kids? Different fields lump and split behaviors into varying numbers of subtypes. This definitional challenge is huge. Let's look at aggression specifically. Animal behaviorists distinguish between offensive and defensive aggression, intruder versus resident. They also differentiate between fighting same species members and fighting predators. Criminologists talk about impulsive versus premeditated acts. Anthropologists care about levels of organization, warfare versus clan vendettas versus homicide. Various disciplines distinguish reactive aggression, response to provocation, from spontaneous aggression, and critically between hot-blooded emotional aggression and cold-blooded instrumental aggression, like "I want your nest spot, scram or I'll peck your eyes out." This isn't personal. Then there's displacement aggression, targeting a weaker third party due to frustration or stress. Shock a rat, it bites the smaller nearby rat. Unemployed baboons increase domestic violence. Depressingly, displacement aggression can decrease stress hormones. And of course, aggression done for pleasure. Specialized types exist too, like maternal aggression, often with distinct hormone profiles, or ritualistic threats, like primates showing teeth without actually fighting. Defining aggression is already a minefield. Defining the positive terms isn't easy either. Empathy versus sympathy, reconciliation versus forgiveness. And then there's altruism versus pathological altruism. A psychologist might see the former in enabling a partner's drug use, while a neuroscientist sees it in frontal cortex damage, causing someone to keep cooperating even when repeatedly betrayed in games. The biggest issue transcends semantics. Does pure altruism actually exist? Can we ever separate doing good from expecting reciprocity, acclaim, self-esteem, or heavenly reward? This plays out fascinatingly with organ donors for strangers. Act's seemingly pure altruism unnerves everyone. Is she secretly paid, desperate for attention? Will she become fatal attraction? What's her deal? The article suggests these profound acts of goodness unnerve us precisely because of their detached, affectless nature. This brings us back to the hot versus cold distinction. We understand hot-blooded badness, passion, rage, grief, and can sometimes see mitigating factors like the grieving father killing his child's murderer. Cold-blooded violence, the affectless killer, the sociopath, Hannibal Lecter is horrifying and incomprehensible. That's why cold-blooded killing is such a damning descriptor. Similarly, we expect our best prosocial acts to be warm-hearted, filled with positive affect. Cold-blooded goodness feels oxymoronic, unsettling. Sapolsky recalls a Buddhist monk at a conference who meditated despite painful knees, not because it hurt, but as an act of kindness to the knees. Praised yet feeling alien. This connects to Elie Wiesel's quote, "The opposite of love is not hate, its opposite is indifference." Strong love and strong hate share similar biological underpinnings. The key point is context and emotional valence. The meaning behind actions matters more than the motor output itself. Which reminds us again, we distinguish between hot-blooded and cold-blooded aggression, and conversely, our most laudable behaviors depend heavily on context. The motor features of our behaviors are less important and challenging to understand than the meaning behind our muscles' actions. This is shown in a subtle study Sapolsky mentions. Subjects in a brain scanner encountered either an injured person needing help or a menacing alien. They could either bandage or shoot. Pulling a trigger and applying a bandage are different behaviors, but both were the right thing in their respective contexts. Contemplating these two different versions of doing the right thing activated the same circuitry in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's most context-savvy region. This reinforces that the brain processes the meaning and appropriateness of actions, not just the actions themselves. Meaning is paramount. So let's recap the strategy. A behavior happened: prosocial, antisocial, ambiguous. Why? Different disciplines offer different answers: hormones, evolution, childhood, genes, culture. The central premise is they're utterly intertwined. But let's start proximally. What happened 1 second before the behavior? That puts us squarely in the realm of neurobiology, understanding the brain that commanded those muscles. This chapter is foundational. The brain is the final common pathway, mediating all the distal influences covered later. It's long and potentially dense, so Appendix 1 Neuroscience 101 is recommended reading. To explore this proximal level, Sapolsky introduces a metaphorical framework, Paul MacLean's triune brain model from the 1960s. It conceptualizes the brain as 3 stacked, functionally distinct layers. Layer 1, the ancient reptilian complex, handles automatic functions found in reptiles and geckos, like shivering when cold, hunger, basic stress response. Layer 2, the paleomammalian complex, evolved in mammals, associated with emotions, drives, social behaviors, processing smells, fear, aggression, mating. Layer 3, the neocortex, highly developed in primates, handles cognition, memory, sensory processing, abstract thought, language planning. It's a useful metaphor for organizing thoughts about how automaticity, emotion, and cognition might interact. But Sapolsky immediately cautions us about the model's drawbacks, which MacLean himself emphasized. It's overly simplistic. Anatomically, the brain structures aren't neatly divided. Functions overlap considerably. Information flow isn't strictly top-down, it's bidirectional and lateral. Holding a cold drink, processed in Layer 1, can make you judge someone as having a cold personality, a Layer 3 judgment. Automaticity, emotion, and cognition are deeply intertwined, not separable modules. And evolution didn't simply slap new layers onto old ones without modifying existing structures. Despite these flaws, Sapolsky argues the triune brain model will serve as a good organizing metaphor for discussing the interplay of automaticity, emotion, and cognition in behavior. So we start exploring this metaphor with Layer 2, the emotion brain. Historically, early 20th century neuroscientists focused on the olfactory bulbs, the primary smell receptors, located right at the front of the brain in rats. They mapped where these bulbs sent signals. The first recipients were structures in what we now consider Layer 2. Everyone concluded, this must process odors, naming it the rhinencephalon, the nose brain. Later, in the 1930s and 40s, researchers like MacLean, Papez, Bucy, and Kluver discovered that damaging these Layer 2 structures produced Kluver-Bucy syndrome, characterized by abnormalities in sociality, especially in sexual and aggressive behaviors. This provided early clues about the role of this brain region in emotion and social behavior. So, to wrap up this introduction section, we've established Sapolsky's core argument: understanding our best and worst requires an integrated, interdisciplinary biological approach, shunning simplistic categories. The next logical step is to zoom in on the proximal mechanisms. What was happening in the brain in that critical second before the behavior? We'll use the triune brain model as a guide, starting with the emotion-laden Layer 2.